I learned what betrayal sounds like through a floor vent at midnight. Once he's declared incompetent, we control everything. That single sentence cracked 50 years of fatherhood like glass. In one night, I went from dad to a problem to be managed, my name pasted onto debts I never signed, my dignity weighed against someone else's convenience. So I did the only thing left that still felt like mine. I walked out with my wife, a ledger, and a promise that the next signature bearing my name would be the truth. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Cedar Street smelled like cedar because I made it that way. I planed the beams myself, shimmed stubborn joists until they stopped complaining, and rubbed the workbench with oil every April as if it were a living thing. The craftsman house wasn't grand, but it fit my hands. The shed out back still carried a slow drift of shavings I hadn't swept. When I woke before the gulls and clicked on the shop light, the old ledger waited with its ruled calm, a place to lay down what got built and what broke. Before the fall, life had the order of a tide chart. I was a Tillamook ranger reading wind and line, a man who knew where a fire would run if given a chance. Nora kept the school library with a gardener's touch, moving books like perennials, sun-hungry titles to the bright shelf, winter stories by the radiator. We weren't fancy, we were steady. Coffee, thermos, steel-toed boots, her pencil behind her ear like a wand that could make silence behave. One bad afternoon unthreaded that order. I was on the roof throwing a tarp before dry lightning, telling my knee it still belonged to me. It didn't. Something tore with a sound I felt more than heard, and I slid 2 shingles before the gutter caught me. Surgery, then rehab, then the parade of invoices that arrive like tides you don't get to vote on. We watched our savings shrink into a shape that wouldn't carry us far. The numbers didn't care how the house looked in October light. Colin came with spreadsheets and concern, the kind that looks like love and math at the same time. "Sell Cedar Street," he said, not unkind. "Move in with us while you heal. Cut costs. We'll make this easier." It's just for a while. Dad, I wanted to tell him, a house isn't costs, it's a ledger of who you've been, but pride is lighter in theory than in a brace. Nora's hand found mine and pressed. "Choose the living people over the wooden ones," she said, quiet but firm. I nodded. I hated doing it, and I did it anyway. Packing is a kind of confession. I wrapped Nora's faded card catalog labels in tissue as if they were glass. I oiled my block plane one last time and slid in the slip of paper where I'd written its bite angle years ago. I turned the key to the shop and stood in the doorway, smelling resin and dust, every cut I'd ever made gathering into a single breath. The ledger went into my jacket pocket, some things you carry on your body like an amulet. Colin's place outside Portland rose from glass and poured concrete, daylight on every surface, a quiet that photographs better than it lives. The floor didn't creak. Sound slid instead of settling. His success was polished, and I was proud the way fathers are proud when a son builds something taller than his old man ever did. I was also cold, though I didn't say so. I carried our last suitcase down a hall that didn't smell like anything. Brooke staged the welcome like a magazine, bowls of seaweed broth steaming clean. Green so bright they looked lit from beneath. She talked about circadian rhythms and blue light glasses, about melatonin and how almond milk is kinder to aging memory. "We're so glad you're here," she said, smiling in a way that could have been for us or her camera. "I set up the guest room and a little garage nook for your tools." I lifted the spoon and let the salt say what I couldn't. Nora found a compliment the way she always does, and the room loosened half an inch. Colin cleared me a corner in the garage. Plastic shelving flexed if you pressed it with a thumb, a thin mat to stand on, one outlet I would learn to share with a freezer of labeled organic meals, and a humming second fridge that wore a detox calendar like a uniform. I set my chisels on the shelf with the care of setting bones. The kit looked curated, not lived in. Life reduced to what could be zip-tied. That first night, the house exhaled a climate-controlled sigh and the windows turned the city's glow into a soft wash. The cedar smell clung to my jacket like a note from a past life. I folded it and slid it under the guest bed because I didn't want the closet's clean breath to take it away. Nora brushed her hair on the edge of the bed, the rhythm unchanged by geography. We didn't say much. There is a tenderness in not making a room carry your worry on its first night. Temporary, I told myself, a word I rolled in my mouth like a lozenge. We'll manage, I whispered to the ceiling. We would heal. We would help our son like he thinks he is helping us. I would mend what I could from a corner of a garage that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and kale. I would learn the way sound moves in a building that never needed nails hammered by hand. I would be grateful in the morning and useful by noon. I lay there counting the pauses in the HVAC like I used to count surf between sets, picturing my workbench in the old light, the ledger waiting for a new line. It would not be forever. That was the promise. I set it on my tongue and tried to let it root. Before sleep finally took me, I pictured the house breathing on Cedar Street, boards answering the night the way old friends do, and I let that memory keep watch. In the new dark, I counted steadiness instead of sheep, the quiet promise that we were only pausing, not ending. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now keep watching. One quiet choice is about to spark a storm. Morning in Cullen's glass house arrives without edges. Light pours down the white stairwell as if it were being curated. The HVAC hums a steady note that makes silence feel engineered. When I cross the garage for coffee filters, the detox calendar taped to the second fridge greets me with tidy boxes and color keys. It is a metronome for a life that isn't mine. Green for cleanse days, blue for sleep optimization, orange for high-output mornings. I can tell this household runs on intentions you can graph. Brooke moves through the kitchen in spotless athleisure, a blender snarling kale into surrender. The counters shine like a showroom. Even the fruit looks ironed. She slides an almond milk carton toward me the way a coach passes a play. Blue light murders melatonin, she says, setting amber-lensed glasses by Nora's bowl. These will help at night. Her tone wears friendliness like a badge, but the sentences land like rules. I nod because disagreement would take more fuel than breakfast holds. Nora puts on the glasses to be gracious and finds a smile that doesn't cost much. Cullen appears with one shoe untied and an apology preloaded in his eyes. He kisses the kids, checks a notification he pretends not to care about, and lifts a travel mug. Back by dinner, he says, already facing the door. I watch the elevator swallow him and listen for the sound of hesitation. What I hear is relief. He is most at ease in motion, where doubt can't gain purchase. The guest room changes while we are out walking the grandkids around the block. When we return, our lamps glow a dull honey. Someone has swapped in amber bulbs. A new rubberized rug lies between bed and bathroom, squared to the baseboard like a safety diagram. My shaving kit is arranged with militant neatness, blade turned away as if I were a child. Each change is defensible. Together they tilt the floor. If I push back, I'm resisting the idea of safety. If I accept it, I'm granting jurisdiction by degrees. By late morning, Brooke's ring light blooms in the living room. A halo softens the edges of her voice as she goes live about caring across generations. I am off camera at the kitchen island, sanding a burr from my thumb with a folded piece of 220 grit. On screen, she describes an elder who resists help, a composite vague enough to be no one and everyone. It's about dignity, she says, and smiles into the lens. My reflection floats in the black TV screen, a shadowy, over-the-shoulder extra in a show where caregiving becomes content. After lunch, I go looking for the maple chair I refinished back on Cedar Street, the one whose seat I carved to carry my spine. The corner where it sat is empty, the absence shaped like me. "Oh, I moved it to the porch," Brooke chirps when I ask, breezing past with a spray bottle that smells like citrus cleaner. The porch holds no chair. That night, insomnia opens the phone in my hand, and there it is on Craigslist, photographed on this very porch. captioned with airy adjectives. The grain I raised with patient steam is now a sales point. I stare at the listing until the price burns into my eyes. I do not wake Nora. There are losses that don't need witnesses to be true. I decide to stop talking and start counting. At the back of my old shop ledger, I open a pocket log, item, action, language, time. Chair relocated, listed for sale. Lamp bulbs replaced. Sleep hygiene. Rug installed. For safety. Shaving kit rearranged, optimized. I learned as a ranger that a map is built from signs you gather without argument. A scuffed rock, a broken twig, a fresher smell of smoke. This is the same work in a different forest. Sensors sprout where walls meet floor, small white dots with a pulse of green when someone passes. A camera blinks awake from the doorframe like an eyelid. Family means safety, Brooke says when she notices me noticing. She says family the way a contract says hereby. I nod because I don't yet know which hill matters and which is just a rise in the terrain. The adhesive smell of new hardware lingers in the hallway like a warning that no one intends as a warning. The kids do not understand euphemism, which makes them truer than any policy. June asks at breakfast, "Why is the milk different?" and wrinkles her nose at the almond aftertaste. Arlo ambles into the guest room, pats the empty corner where the chair used to be, and pronounces, "Grandpa's seat." The simplicity hurts and warms in the same breath. I kneel to their height and answer gently, because in this house they are my only guaranteed softness. "We're just trying new things," I tell June, and smooth Arlo's hair where the cowlick never surrenders. In the garage, my corner of plastic shelving holds what a life looks like when it's been boiled down. Chisels wrapped in a rag, a block plane in a shoebox, sandpaper stacked under a bag of chia seeds I didn't put there. The organic fridge hums beside me, the detox calendar bright as a lighthouse you don't steer by. I stand on the thin mat and touch each tool as if reciting a prayer I don't want to forget. The sockets tick in the amber light, all theater and no heat. I write a new line in the pocket log, "Watch, don't argue." It feels like betrayal of my younger self, who believed in calling a thing by its right name. But I have also been a husband long enough to know that timing is a tool. A good joint fails if you drive the pen too early. I let the pen press a deeper groove into the paper. "Temporary," I tell myself again, tasting the word as if it might still dissolve. The syllables carry a splinter now. I can't help tonguing it. When I finally switch off the garage light, the house hums in its optimized sleep. The sensors blink their green assurances. The camera's eye glitters like a bead of rain that never falls. In bed, Nora reads by amber glow, the lenses turning her eyes to evening. I listen to the HVAC trace its circuit and let the day settle into the ledger of my head. I will heal. I will help. I will keep the map, and I will wait, not for permission, but for the first wind that tells me which way this weather is truly moving. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment #1 below to let me know you're with me. Now stay close. The first real crack is about to split wide open. The house at midnight sounded less like a home than a machine between cycles. The HVAC breathed in the vents. The elevator cables ticked as the shaft cooled. An amber bulb in the guest bath cast a small ellipse across the hallway floor, the kind of light you don't turn on so much as agree to. I woke without knowing why and felt the cool of polished concrete under my soles when I stood. The air carried a faint citrus cleaner ghost and the plasticky sweetness of fresh adhesive, what the little baseboard sensors exhale when no one's supposed to notice them. Somewhere down the hall, water moved through pipes and then stilled. A narrower sound began, two voices pressed low, drawn thin by distance and architecture. I sat and the floor grate on our wall made the decision for me, carrying a voice clear enough to count syllables. The kitchen was mostly glass and hard angles. It turned whispers into wire. Brooke's tone wasn't soft, only small. "The Beaverton facility is $43.50 a month," she said. The number landed where I keep pulse and breath. She didn't pause to sell it. She listed line items like a ledger read aloud. Room, meals, medication management, memory care, if indicated. The words clicked as they left her mouth, a bracelet of metal beads. Cullen answered with the voice he used for difficult clients he wanted to like him. On what grounds? It wasn't a dare. It was a hope that grounds might not exist. Guardianship, she whispered, incompetent to manage finances. Once the court signs off, their Social Security and pension can be redirected, and the insurance payout is managed by us as legal guardians. It's safer for everyone. She said safer the way a sign says keep off the rocks. Our doctor will support it, she added, as if the decision were already printed. He understands the situation. What about their wishes, he asked. Smaller now. That's the point of a competency hearing, she replied. It recognizes they can't make sound decisions anymore. You know the episodes I've documented, the late-night wandering, the confusion with meds. It's not unkind, it's necessary. The words went through me in a clean line and left a cold space. I didn't move. The grate gave me fragments of the room below, cup against counter, the soft ping of an appliance, the quick inhalation people make when they think they have been merciful. My hand found Nora's shoulder in the half-dark. She was already awake, eyes open, listening with the stillness of someone who learned long ago how to make silence hold more than noise. Elder abuse, I whispered. She nodded once, a small movement that still felt like a bell. We are not lawyers, but you don't need a statute to recognize the sound of someone arranging your life in their favor and calling it care. I reached into the nightstand for the shop ledger I had smuggled like a relic. The paper rasped as I opened to the back pages and steadied the pen. Date, time, phrases, guardianship, incompetent to manage finances, redirect Social Security and pension, insurance payout managed by us, doctor will support. Cost, $4,350 per month. I printed the number, punctuating the comma as if it mattered to the math of what was being taken. The ledger had always been a record of boards and joints and boats that floated. Tonight, it made room for words that wanted to sink me. We did not plan a confrontation. We made 3 columns, the most practical map I know. Cash, meds, documents. Nora knew where the passports and marriage certificate lived now, in a sterile, labeled bin brook called Heritage. I wrote USB family photos and felt the ridiculousness of fitting a life in a thumb-length plastic bone. I added insurance cards, photo, and used my old flip phone to take pictures that would be ugly but legible. Nora began counting pill doses by the amber glow, whispering numbers that settled me more than any prayer. We'll give it 3 days, I said. Enough to gather. Not enough to be cornered. She wrote the number 3 on a post-it and stuck it to the ledger page as if it belonged there. In daylight, we would walk the kids, compliment the soups, and nod at the sensors as though they were potted plants. At night, we would assemble a smaller life, 1 bag at a time. I printed a rule at the bottom of the page, the way a ranger writes at a fire line. Leave clean, no confrontation. The house's hum smoothed out as if it had heard and approved the plan. I folded my jacket on the chair and then moved it to the drawer where the cedar scent would last longer. In the same drawer lay my old Cedar Street keyring, brass worn silky by years of doorways. I turned it in my hand, a rehearsal for the surrender I would make later on the kitchen counter. I stood and eased the guest room door an inch, listening. One hinge complained, a thin mouse squeak. I closed, opened slower. No sound. I mapped the route to the back stairs in my head, cataloging every surface that might talk when pressed. From the closet, I slid out the duffel with the torn lining and fished out the envelope of storm cash, the money I'd kept for fires, floods, things that teach you the limits of planning. Nora laid out pill bottles like soldiers and wrote refill info on a square of paper she tucked into a zip bag. I found the small tin where I kept the spare iron for my block plane and wrapped it in a rag torn from an old shop shirt. We would not carry the plane itself. We would carry what makes it cut. We lay back in the same posture as any other night, but the air changed shape. The amber ellipse on the hall floor narrowed as the bulb warmed. The baseboard sensor made its quiet pulse. I counted 2 breaths, then said what my chest had been shaping since the number 4,350 arrived. I'd rather sleep under a bridge than sign myself away. Nora turned her head on the pillow, the lenses she used for reading catching the light. "We won't," she said. The house continued, indifferent. Somewhere below, a glass touched stone and a voice said something I couldn't catch. I watched the digital clock click to 12:17 a.m. and let the numbers fix the moment in place. The ledger lay open on my chest, the ink drying to a dullness that looked like resolve. Fear didn't leave. It moved to the seat beside me and kept quiet. 3 days, it agreed, then out. By daylight, we played our parts. I walked the grandkids around the block, read the street trees like trail markers, and waved at neighbors who liked the brochure idea of 3 generations under one roof. I thanked Brooke for soup I didn't taste. I tidied the garage corner, aligning chisels so precisely it looked like a photograph of work rather than work. At night, we moved life in inches. Passports slid into inner pockets. Insurance cards were photographed and folded into Nora's wallet. Pills were portioned into silent sleeves set beneath the socks. The USB of family photos vanished into the inside of my belt with a strip of tape. The ledger took on a second life. Not boats, not joints, just steps, dates, and the small logistics of leaving without setting off alarms. Close to midnight on the third night, the house settled into its engineered breathing, and we shouldered the duffel and the wheeled bag. I guided Nora past the hinge that complains, the sensor that blinks twice, the shallow fourth step on the back stair. In the kitchen, I set our guest key on the island beside a folded note that said only thank you. Leave clean, that was the rule. The door clicked once. Rain waited outside, a soft applause that hid footsteps and second thoughts. The city at that hour is mostly light without people. The sidewalks shone like wet slate, and the bag bucked at every crack. My knee spoke in its blunt vocabulary. Scout's leash looped twice around my wrist so he'd keep low and quiet, a shadow stitched to my leg. We took 2 side streets to avoid cameras, then stepped into the hiss of a bus, doors breathing open like a lung. The driver examined the dog and lifted an eyebrow. "Emotional support," I said. He grunted and pointed to the back. The air smelled like old vinyl and raincoats that never quite dry. Greyhound at night is a warehouse for hours. Under fluorescent fatigue, we found 2 chairs that wobbled in opposite directions. Security swept like weather no one controls. On the ledger's last page, I did the math that keeps fear from inventing numbers. 1,280 from the tools I'd sold, 180 from Nora's side gig, 1,660, 2 morning fares already earmarked. Coffee, toast, rain. Motels at 60 to 70 a night meant 2 weeks before zero. Assigning numbers shrank the panic into something that could be stacked and counted. A man in a faded department jacket stopped when he saw my Tillamook cap. He had the posture of someone who'd carried more weight than this night. He traded us 2 aisle seats for a back pair so Scout could curl at our feet and slid a bottle of water toward Nora as if it were nothing. "Name's Eli," he said. I nodded. "Henry." He said good luck like a benediction without church, and it landed kinder than any sermon. The terminal closes to non-travelers for a slice of the night. We needed a place to be. 2 blocks east, a diner held its lights the way a lighthouse keeps its beam steady. Inside, coffee steamed honest, the bell over the door rang without irony, and the vinyl booths remembered the shape of other nights. My blood pressure reminded me about the pill I had buried under layers of caution. The room tilted. Nora already had a sleeve in her coat pocket for exactly this. The bitter disc sat on my tongue like a coin. Water, breath. The tilt leveled. Small foresight is a kind of wealth. We weighed destinations the way you weigh lumber, for straightness, strength, and what it will carry. Big cities were visible and expensive. Small towns with tides stretched dollars and hid people by making them belong. Pine Harbor sounded like a place that might learn our names without needing our histories. I bought 2 early tickets with the care of cutting a tenon, no slop, no do-overs. I wrote the name in the ledger and felt the word take weight. The woman at the counter noticed Scout's bowl under our table and chose not to notice the suitcases. Her name tag said Marisol. Sit as long as you need if you keep a plate on the table, she said, already moving away. By the register, a corkboard waited for people who still believe community can be stapled up. A grease pencil had scrawled on a torn scrap, "Ben Thuyen needs repairs." Cash. Ask for Ray. Oxygen in 3 words. I copied the number and circled it twice on the ledger margin. We still needed somewhere to ride out the hours until first light. Marisol made 2 phone calls and handed me a sticky note with a church address. "Pastor Lila will meet you," she said. The hall smelled like floor wax and hymnals, the kind of clean that takes time. She opened the door, set 2 blankets on a stack of folded chairs, and didn't ask questions that would cost us dignity to answer. Scout turned twice and lay down with a sigh a ship would understand. The lights dimmed to the color of rest. Before sleep undid the knots, Eli leaned in the doorway, voice kept low for the sanctity of borrowed rooms. "I pulled a quick look at public filings for your son's company," he said. "Your name rang a bell." He paused, measuring whether I couldn't see. "There's an SBA loan with a co-guarantor listed as Henry Malloy." I felt the temperature drop as if someone had opened an unseen door. "I never signed that," I said. He watched my face the way firefighters watch the wind. "Figured you should know." The room felt smaller but clearer. I added a new line to the ledger. "Check SBA records." Then I put the pen away. We would not fight phantom paperwork at 2 in the morning on borrowed blankets. First we reach Pine Harbor, then we find Ray. Then we earn 3 clean nights under a roof that doesn't mind if you smell like rain. Dawn thinned the windows until the glass went the color of milk. We stood into our plan not because it was brave, but because it was the next thing that could be done. Dawn in Pine Harbor poured over the water like milk tipped from a blue bottle. I stepped off the bus and heard the harbor speak its plain language, gulls heckling, a halyard ticking a metal beat against a mast, a diesel throat clearing somewhere beyond the bait shop. Tar and kelp rode the air together, a union I've always trusted more than any sales pitch. Scout sniffed, squared his shoulders, and settled, as if the brine itself told him there were rules here he could understand. The ledger in my jacket felt heavier with the word I'd written last night, Pine Harbor, as if ink could add ballast. We found Ray where Marisol's note said he'd be, a hat with salt stains, a jaw like a piece of knotty oak, boots planted near a stack of gray planks. He pointed with his chin at the dock's soft section and handed me a pry bar. I tested the first board and felt the rot give under the nail head. It was the honest kind of failure, no tricks. I lifted, sistered a joist, set stainless screws until they bit and sang. Ray watched without commentary, then counted cash from a folded envelope and slapped it into my palm like payment and handshake in one. "If you show tomorrow," he said, "there's more." The only answer that felt right was showing tomorrow. Gull and Tide held its windows full of morning. Inside, the griddle's music mixed with coffee steam and the cinnamon that means something sweet is near. Marisol slid 2 bowls of chowder onto our table like we'd been earning them for years, then casually moved us to a booth along the wall where Scout could tuck under and not draw anyone's rules. No pity, no performance. My shoulders let down a notch I hadn't noticed they were holding. I told her the neon gull on her sign stuttered in the wind. "If you can reach it," she said, "it's yours." I took that as permission and as a test. Pastor Leela came by with a nurse from a clinic you'd miss if you didn't already know how to look for help. Blood pressure cuff, steady questions, a pencil scratch in a small notebook that didn't feel like a report to be weaponized. We reconciled pills and wrote a path to refills that didn't depend on anyone's goodwill in Portland. Competence without theater lowers an inner temperature you forget you've been carrying. When they left, Nora's shoulders sat easier under her sweater. Mine did too. By noon, the wind had picked up, restless as a boy on the last day of school. I went up the diner's side ladder with a meter in my pocket and a small tool roll. The neon transformer was losing the thread on its ground. A conduit saddle had loosened. Salt does its work on everything, even light. I reseated, tightened, weatherproofed. When the gull outline held steady, a man at the counter clapped once and then returned to his plate. Marisol didn't say good job. She slid a pie slice in front of Nora and gave me a nod that meant more than praise ever does. Mid-afternoon, she asked almost as an aside if I might look at a loose stair tread, and while I was at it, whether the small room above the kitchen would scare me away with onion smell. Month to month, she said. Cheap. We didn't accept. We traded nods and left the keys for future doors where we could see them. Dignity does better when choices come dressed as questions, not rescues. We counted cash at dusk. Ray's envelope plus what we had left from the ledger made a number big enough to cover days, not weeks. Nora sketched a simple menu in the margin. Beans, eggs, chowder twice if needed. And I penciled a dock diagram with the next run of screws and how many to pre-drill. Scout exhaled like a bellows at our feet. The wind carried a buoy bell through the alley and set it in my chest where Faith used to sit. The bell over the diner door rang against a gust, and Colin stood there in a coat glazed with sea mist. In a month, he'd acquired the look of someone who sleeps in a chair and calls it a bed. Relief and dread arrived together on his face. Marisol read the room like she'd been hired for this scene and flipped a small sign that told the world we closed early. We moved to the back booth. Nora's hand found mine under the table and held what had to be held. He started with breath instead of words. Then the words found him. Brooke's been building a case, he said, eyes on the wood grain because it stayed put. The doctor, the lawyer. I didn't understand the full extent. He paused. I avoided understanding. He did not ask us to come back. He said the kids missed us, and he said it like a confession, not a bargaining chip. He sounded like a man learning the shape of his own spine and hating the math of it. I kept my voice level and placed a single question on the table like a tool I might need later. There's an SBA loan that lists me as co-guarantor. Why does my name appear? He flinched like the word had more edge than I'd swung. I thought it was intent paperwork, he said. Brooke handled the forms. I let the next sentence sit between us like cold iron. I didn't sign. We did not escalate. We marked the line where metal meets wood and leaves a true seam. I'm not going back, I said, not now. Nora added, if you want to see us, you can come here, where we live our lives. Colin nodded, not in victory or defeat, just in recognition that terrain is real whether or not you prefer another map. He stood without drama. I'll call before bringing the kids, he said. The bell sounded smaller when the door shut behind him, like a note held underwater. Marisol set down a hot water and left without hovering. A text from Lila blinked, here if needed. Outside, the harbor wind worked the diner's vent until it shivered and then settled. I opened the ledger and wrote 2 lines that read more like vows than notes. Colin came alone, we stay. The paper took the ink the way seasoned wood takes oil, without fuss, made better for it. We stepped into the lane. The neon gull held steady, a small bird of light convincing itself it could ride this weather. I put my palm against the diner's brick and felt the sun it had kept all afternoon. Tomorrow the dock would still need screws, the stair tread would still be loose, and the room above the kitchen would still be waiting for an answer. The shock of the day hadn't spent itself, but the ground under us wasn't borrowed anymore. It belonged enough for us to stand on it and call it ours. If you're still watching and finding these insights helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now keep your seat. Solutions are coming with a twist we didn't expect. I woke to the mingled smells of dock water and onions riding the air vent from the diner kitchen below. It was the kind of warmth a building makes when people are already working, not the programmed comfort of a thermostat. Knees stiff, shoulder a little cranky, I sat up into honest fatigue and poured coffee into 2 paper cups. Nora spread the ledger between us on the windowsill and drew a small box around 3 words, housing, health, council, like coordinates. Outside, the neon gull we'd steadied yesterday held its line against a sullen morning wind. Pine Harbor wasn't asking us to be brave, it was asking us to act. We said yes to the room above the kitchen. The stair was narrow and spoke in one place, a single step with a loose nail I promised to set by noon. The banister had been polished by decades of hands. The window looked over the square where two pickups idled and argued in diesel. The floor hummed faintly with the walk-in cooler's compressor. Steady, serviceable, proof that things were being kept. Marisol slid a key across the counter and with it a short, dignified arrangement. Month to month, rent reduced in exchange for morning baking, help from Nora, and repairs from me. It felt like trade, not rescue. I put the key in my pocket and my breath settled a notch. We built a rhythm before we moved in the second stack of folded shirts. Nora traced out dough timings with the calm of a librarian rebuilding a card catalog. Starter at 5, roll, proof, bake. Muffins by 7. Cinnamon twists if the weather demanded comfort. I made a repair list. Stair tread, the prep sink's slow weep, a back door that swelled on damp days and stuck at the strike plate. Work is a language, and the sentences here were short and sensible. We didn't talk much. Flour dust and stainless screws said what needed saying. Health had to be more than hope. Pastor Lila made a call, and by late morning we sat in an exam room with a window at shoulder height and the careful smell of antiseptic. A local GP ran us through MOCA and MMSE, his pen tapping a slow metronome on the clipboard. I named animals, counted backward, drew a clock that looked like a clock. Nora's recall was crisp enough that the doctor grinned. "Stay off the internet self-diagnosis," he said, making a tiny joke of the whole machine. We left with small medication adjustments, printed notes establishing current cognitive capacity, and a sense that the ground under our feet had stopped shifting, at least on this front. Counsel came with tar rope in the stairwell because Dax Nguyen's office sat above the bait shop. He wore a neat shirt and a fisherman's patience. No billboards, no theatrics. He listened until the room felt bigger, then laid out a plan in 4 clicks. Document capacity, preserve evidence, create notarized signature specimens, and send nothing loud unless we had to. "No direct contact," he said, and slid across a 1-page instruction sheet for when phones start ringing. His tone was precise without being cold. I realized how thirsty I'd been for sentences that did not overpromise. He called in a mobile notary who knocked like a neighbor. Rebecca Hale had stamped grant papers for our ranger station back when windstorms still made the news. Memory put a human frame around procedure. She watched my pen as I signed my name in a quiet room and pressed her seal with a click that felt like a boundary snapping back into place. Specimens dated, witnessed, packaged. My name, once a thing to be used, became itself again. Dax opened a laptop and asked if we were ready to look at what had been said about us. Brooke had shared incident clips with the doctor, glossy files named for concern. He brought up a waveform and rolled it back and forth with a fingertip. Time-based mismatches blinked like mislaid stitches. Consonants landed in the seam between cuts. The same room tone appeared twice where no room breathes exactly the same way. "This is edited," he said, not performing certainty, just pointing at it. Then he played a raw ring from a doorbell cam a neighbor had consented to share, a stray capture from a hallway in Portland. Brooke's voice drifted in before the scene it supposedly belonged to, coaching the kids to repeat a line about Grandma getting confused. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was a hand on the holster. We didn't file anything. Dax saved checksums, logged chain of custody, wrote a memo in clean, stacked paragraphs. "Evidence sits better when it's not angry," he said. I understood the craft in that. You can split a joint if you drive the peg before the glue has gripped. Back in the room, we wrote rules the way Rangers write fire line orders. All contact through counsel, no unannounced visits. Any device or camera proposal refused in writing with reasons. Rage wanted a longer list. Discipline cut it to 3 and made them legible. We copied the rules onto an index card and taped it inside the cupboard where we would see them before we answered any door. That night, we wrote letters to June and Arlo by the window where the square's streetlight paled the page. We told them about Scout learning which goals to ignore and which to admire, about dough rising like a trick worth believing in, about a small neon bird that remembered how to hold steady after a storm. We didn't blame. We offered coordinates. I sketched a fat-bellied skiff with a crooked smile and gave it a name only they would understand. Ray stopped by with a sack of stainless screws he called extras and left them without a lecture. Marisol slid a dish of labeled keys under our door, back alley, supply closet, sign switch, each one a vote of confidence. Lila texted clinic hours and nothing else. Belonging here came as tasks and tools, not as speeches about family or duty. We named what we'd do next and what we wouldn't. Next, request our medical records from Portland, ask for SBA loan copies through proper channels, schedule a follow-up with Dax, keep receipts, sleep. Not argue online, return to talk it out. Let fear plan the week. Writing the two lists side by side put the day back in our hands. Night came gentler than it used to. Onion warmth rose through the floorboards. I cracked the window to let in a draft of brine, set my block plane spare iron on the sill like a crescent of cooled moon, and opened the ledger to a new column titled Stay. The neon gull hummed its clean outline across the square, and for the first time in months I felt the word home arrive without needing anyone else to sign it. Morning came with the compressor's steady thrum and a gull's heckle threading the square. Onion warmth rose through the floorboards and I let it settle my breath while Nora tied her apron and reached for flour. We kept our rhythm on purpose, she at dough and proofing racks, me at the repair list taped to the cooler. Phones began a nervous dance on the windowsill, unknown numbers, voicemails delivered in a tone that wanted credit for caring. I didn't answer. I taped our rules of engagement card to the door at eye level and read the 3 lines like a catechism before touching any latch. Out back, the diner's sticky strike plate needed honesty more than force. I planed the swollen edge, reseated screws, and tested the swing until the latch met the keeper like it had remembered how. Stainless bit clean and the sound of a door closing, true, steadied something inside me the calls were trying to shake. Scout slept under the prep table, one paw twitching as if he were running along the harbor trail. Marisol slid coffee to my elbow and went on taking orders as if the world outside the window were background weather and not the point. The smear arrived inside a patron's palm. He held a phone like bad news carries weight and angled it toward the counter. A post had spread, cropped photos, a hero narrative about saving confused elders coerced by strangers. The language was syrup and venom at once. Comments piled, advice, outrage, threats dressed as prayers. 2 calls hit the diner's line in quick succession, voices trying on pity like a costume. Marisol flipped the ringer off and pinned a handwritten note by the register. We don't discuss private lives, then moved on to refill coffee. Silence became a shield we could stand behind. Dax moved faster than the feed. Before lunch, he sent a cease and desist and a preservation letter to Brooke, the doctor, and the lawyer she'd been courting. Takedown requests flew with hashes attached. Platform holds went out to anyone hosting the edited clips. His instructions to us were blunt in the best way. Do not post, do not debate, save every log. I wrote the timestamps in the ledger, the page starting to look like a ship's log under storm. The door knocked early afternoon with a rhythm that wasn't customers. 2 officers stood in the alley light, hats polite, posture careful. A wellness check had been requested, anonymous, urgent. I met them on the tile where flour turns footprints white. Pastor Lila arrived at my shoulder by coincidence that was probably planned. IDs, Dax's card, the doctor's capacity note. They asked to see where we slept, looked at the stairs, glanced at the workboard, noted the bakery hours, and wrote him an incident number that sounded like one too many. They left with nods and a hint of relief. I logged the number as if it were a knot tied on a line I might need to find again by feel. Lunch rush tested the room's balance. Regulars tipped heavier than plates warranted and kept their opinions between napkin and pocket. A fisherman folded a scrap and slid it across to me without commentary. Dock gate chain squeaks, bring oil. In a day that wanted spectacle, that note was a benediction. I added oil can to the tool bag and found the chain at dusk. A few drops and a patient hand took the groan out of the link. Mid-afternoon, Dax called from the bait shop stairs where the air carries rope and salt. Brooks' lawyer had filed for an ex parte emergency guardianship in Multnomah County, alleging immediate risk. He'd caught it on the e-docket, dialed into the quick hearing, and placed our capacity notes and the metadata memo where the judge could see. The order was denied. The transcript picked up a word I hadn't expected a courtroom to adopt for us, tampering, and suggested any refile carry an independent evaluator's report. I let the phone rest against my breastbone for one slow count and then wrote a line in the ledger that felt like keel weight returning. Within the hour, the bank called from a number that knows how to make your stomach drop. A fraud analyst in a voice that lived between apology and procedure said someone had attempted an address change and to add me as co-responsible on a credit line tied to the SBA trail. I confirmed the attempt was unauthorized. They set a freeze across bureaus and flagged SSA and the pension administrator. The analyst gave me a reference number and the feeling of a door closing before a wind could push through. I wrote both down and underlined the phrase active financial exploitation because naming a thing fixes it to the page and keeps it from roaming your chest. A text reached Dax from Colin, brief and shaped differently than his old silences. He hadn't authorized the filing or the bank actions. He was locking down devices and requesting copies of whatever Brooke had submitted in his name. It wasn't absolution, it was motion toward a spine. I let myself notice it and then turned back to the stair tread that still needed resetting because wood doesn't wait well on human epiphanies. Stress remembered my knee by late afternoon. A nurse at the clinic checked my pressure, raised an eyebrow, and adjusted timing with the calm of someone steering a small boat through a known chop. Nora walked me along the harbor until the buoy bell settled the numbers in my head, if not on the machine. We named the fear without letting it own anything, then returned to the heat and noise of work, where worries can't shout over the mixer. By evening, the town had quietly built a perimeter. Ray installed a new hasp at the dock gate without charge and left his driver to deliver the bill later with a wink. Lila positioned 2 volunteers near the diner phone to field anything ugly. Marisol showed us the back alley exit plan, not like a drama but a map that assumed calm feet. Interlocking hands, doors, phones, hasps made a ring around the day. Upstairs, we logged what happened and what would happen next. Wellness check number, docket info bank reference, takedown receipts. Tomorrow's list, finish planing the back door, mail the letters to June and Arlo, request SBA copies formally, verify freezes, schedule the independent evaluator the judge suggested, show up to work. We did not plan revenge. We planned maintenance. The neon gull held steady beyond the glass, a drawn breath I could match. I set the block plane, iron back on the sill, edged toward the window like a compass point, and wrote a single line across the ledger's bottom. Pressure is weather. We are Hull. Morning arrived with the easy duet I've come to trust. Onion warmth breathing up through the floor and the neon gull outside, holding its clean outline against a washed sky. Before reading any messages, I took the oil can to the dock gate, worked the new hasp ray installed yesterday, and let the chain swallow a few slow drops. The squeal flattened into a polite whisper. Beginning with a fix I could feel gave the day a spine. Back upstairs, Marisol set a thin folder on our little table. The lease was 4 paragraphs and a signature block, not a trap disguised as help. Month to month, she said, tapping the line with a pen, cheap, and I added 1 clause for your peace, no cameras or devices without consent. I read every word aloud to Nora the way I used to read trail advisories before fire season. We initialed margins, signed our names, and swapped copies for a receipt. The moment ink hit paper, the room's edges softened. The upstairs stopped feeling borrowed and started answering to home. I wrote lease executed in the ledger and underlined it like you'd shore a beam. Work needed shape, too. Marisol slid over 2 one-pagers. Nora's laid out morning baking hours and a shift meal. Mine spelled a rate, materials passed through, and a standing list of maintenance targets. I hung a clipboard with a calendar beside the stair. Nora posted her bake schedule under it in a neat hand. The diner answered by becoming more itself. Proofing baskets marched in rows. The back door swung like it remembered how, and the clatter of breakfast plates became a rhythm we could join. Dax called mid-morning to say the independent evaluator could see us by noon in the county over. We found the clinic with salt dried on our coats and filled out forms in a quiet room where pens clicked and paper rasped. Dr. Imani Rutherford had the calm of someone who refuses to be hurried by other people's panic. Trails A and B, MoCA, clock draw, story recall, I named the animals and told the short tail back with enough detail to satisfy my own pride. Nora handled the memory lists like a veteran librarian. "I'll issue a report within a week," Dr. Rutherford said, voice even. "You're both in good shape." It wasn't flattery. It was a measurement, and I felt taller for having been measured. Afterward, we crossed the street to the post office with a stack of certified letters. Requests for the SBA loan package copies, the bank's application trail, SSA address verification, pension administrator alerts, a paper perimeter drawn in registered ink. I verified credit freezes at all 3 bureaus and added fraud alerts set to call Dax before they called me. The clerk's rubber stamp thudded down each time, like a small shield hammered onto a larger one. In the ledger, I taped the slips and wrote "sent," then the date, then a line I've learned to love. Wait for the packet. Do not speculate. The SBA portal showed document image pending, which meant a breadcrumb existed even if I hadn't held it yet. Dax flagged the next steps. Signature comparison, IP metadata, custody history, so my mind didn't invent its own evidence to fill the silence. Beside that note, I wrote only, "Keep working." Ray appeared around 2 with a coil of tarred line and an offer. "Half day a week for peer inspections," he said. "Storm prep call list 2. You in?" I said I was. He handed me a worn brass key to the supply cage, and it jingled like trust. His chisel edge looked tired, so I sharpened it on the spot and passed it back without commentary. He nodded, and we went on with our day. Back at the diner, we packed 2 envelopes addressed in Nora's careful print. The letters to June and Arlo carried harbor stories instead of arguments. A gull that figured out crosswind, a dog learning which boats to greet, a cinnamon twist that accidentally came out like a knot. Dax relayed them to Colin with delivery instructions and no room for spin. That evening, through Dax, a single photo arrived, June's drawing of a gull and scout under a big blue sky, Arlo's stickboat with our initials scrawled on the hull. We answered with a postcard that said as little as it needed to say and exactly as much as love requires. We used the last hour of light to build a timeline in Dax's office above the bait shop. The stairwell smelled like rope and old salt. His conference table smelled like fresh manila and toner. We read the ledger into clean sentences, dates, phrases, calls, docket hits. Pastor Lila and Marisol came up one at a time, signed short affidavits about the wellness check and the prank calls, and left without adding commentary. Evidence grew in boxes with labels and a chain of custody log that weighed more with each initial. "Please don't engage online," Dax said. "Paper is the narrative that lasts." The local GP saw us late afternoon for a check and a word. My knee got a glance and a better plan. Blood pressure timing shifted a notch. He printed a note, stable, compliant, working, and I stapled it behind Dr. Rutherford's pending report in the binder Dax gave us. It looked plain there, which is how I prefer important things to look. At home, we practiced 2 scripts until they felt like muscle memory. "Please contact our attorney, Mr. Nguyen," and "no consent to record." We taped them by the phone and the downstairs door because panic steals nouns and verbs if you let it. Then we turned back to the tasks that hold a day together. I reset the loose stair tread with glue and screws sunk below flush. Nora's cinnamon twist sold out before 10 and left sugar drifting in the air like quiet confetti. Regulars left order notes folded around cash, not opinions. The register closed without anyone asking for a story we weren't selling. After supper, we made a 3-week plan. We penciled target dates, evaluator report return, SBA and bank packets, SSA confirmation, first rent due on the lease, raise storm drill. We left a weekend open at the edge of the calendar for a supervised visit if Collins stayed steady. The plan didn't try to solve months. It offered a path through days. In the Windows soft square, I slid my notarized signature page into a plastic sleeve and laid the block plain iron across the binder like a straight edge that says, "Make it true." Then I wrote one clean line across the ledger. "We build, we keep proof. We leave the rest to time. I begin the day with tools before I allow answers in. The backhaul hinge takes one thin kiss of oil. The neon gull outside gets a glance to be sure its outline holds. Raised hard line gets a tidy figure 8 around a cleat. The harbor keeps time with halyards and gull calls. On the upstairs table, the binder sits open, rings ready, ledger waiting. There is a right order to steadying yourself, and mine starts with work I can feel in my hands. Dax arrives with a manila envelope and a face that does not rehearse outcomes on your behalf. He places Dr. Amani Rutherford's report in front of me, signed in blue ink, subtests, scores, narrative impressions. The phrases land like ballast. Oriented, coherent, reliable historian, no evidence of major neurocognitive disorder. He forwards it to the Multnomah clerk and our former doctor and asks, in writing, for an addendum acknowledging receipt. I slide our copy into a plastic sleeve and breathe in a way I haven't in months. Measurements don't love you, they hold you up anyway. The mail brings the heavier bite. A certified packet from the lender carries the SBA loan package, application, guarantor pages, e-sign audit log. My name appears in a hand that mimics mine the way a photocopy fakes light. Baseline drift wrong, downstrokes too eager, pressure rising where I relax. The audit metadata lists submission from Colin's home IP on a date stamped in my head as the night we were on a library video call showing the grandkids Rusty's trick. Session user, assistant. I don't let myself narrate. I underline discrepancies and, in Dax's memo, sign a precise sentence. I did not consent to or execute this guarantee. Proof is a quiet blade. Remediation flips like a switch Dax had ready. He files an SBA fraud forgery declaration with attachments, sends banks a correction packet, our notarized specimens, evaluator report, audit anomalies, and requests freeze and segregation of any liability tied to the tainted line. He moves the clerk to note the forgery in the same docket where the ex parte was denied. Each step produces copies. Each copy lands in the binder like a brace under a shelf that had been sagging. Our former doctor sends a brief addendum before lunch. It is not poetry. Withdraws earlier informal concerns pending independent evaluation. The sentence is a plank set back in the span. Dax files it alongside Dr. Rutherford's report, and I feel the narrative's shape change inside the system, which is where shape matters. Online, the heat cools. The takedowns hold, prank calls taper to a final few that bump against Marisol's off switch and die. By the register, she posts a typed notice the size of a recipe card. We support dignified aging. We also serve pie. The diner returns to its true business. Coffee refills, ordered chits, the soft percussion of plates stacked in a hurry without breaking. Afternoon swings in on a salty wind and the bell over the door. Colin stands there with June's mittened hand in his and Arlo already stepping forward, momentum made of 4-year-old certainty. They don't wait for scripts. They hit our chests with small, decisive arms, and the room decides to be a room that holds. Marisol tips the back in 30 sign at the door and ushers the regulars out with to-go cups nobody complains about. We take the back booth. Colin keeps his eyes on the table grain. I avoided what I didn't want to see, he says. I let Brooke build a story and lent it my silence. I didn't vet the clips, the guardianship filing, my name's on it, the loan, she handled the forms. I didn't sign, but I didn't stop it. He doesn't spread blame like butter. He says he is working with Dax on device custody and unwinding whatever exposure he created. I nod once. Boundaries need nouns. Visits happen here, I say. No contact with Brooke. Logistics through counsel, Nora adds, no surprises. He agrees, not as a favor, but as recognition of terrain. Grandparenting resumes where performance stops. We present June with the postcard she drew, now framed in a cheap frame that looks like a jewel in her hands. Arlo glues a popsicle stick skiff and seats a single stainless screw into a pilot hole while my thumb steadies the driver. Scout leans against their knees until his hips remember age and he lowers himself with dignity. Nora shows dough blooming under a towel. The children watch as if seeing weather arrive. Dax drafts a letter that sits exactly where leverage lives. If the corrections hold, the voided loan, a guardianship withdrawn with prejudice, a written retraction to the doctor, we won't file. If not, we will. He doesn't posture. He stacks facts and dates and gives them a place to stand. We choose leverage over spectacle because spectacle only feeds itself. The town renders its verdict the way towns do when they mean it, without speeches. Pastor Lila stops by and pays for 4 hot chocolates nobody needs to drink right then. Ray waves the kids onto the safe part of the dock and hands Arlo a length of harmless line to learn a cleat hitch. A fisherman lifts 2 fingers from his cup in greeting, and the gesture lands as permission to keep breathing. By evening, the emails arrive like knots relaxing. The bank confirms the forged line is voided, address lock set, monitoring in place. The SBA acknowledges an active fraud review and suspends any obligations tied to the forged guarantee. SSA confirms our freeze and alerts. I write unwind in progress in the ledger and notice a place in my chest let go of something it had been carrying like a beam. After Colin drives the kids back, with Dax informed and a next date penciled, we sit at the little table upstairs and list what changes. Monthly visits here on the calendar. Photo mail routed through council, not platforms. No direct messages, no surprise arrivals. A door stays ajar for Colin because doors, to be useful, have hinges. The pass doesn't get a key. Night wraps the square in the color neon invents. Cinnamon sugar hovers in a warmth that makes sense. I set the block plane iron across the binder's spine like a straight edge insisting on true lines. Then I write the final line for the day in the ledger that saved us from shouting, "We held the line, we kept the proof, we chose our weather." The day begins the way I want most days to begin now, with work small enough to finish and important enough to matter. I touch the neon goals switch and listen for its even hum, a thin wire of light holding the morning together. I run a fingertip under the back hall hinge and feel the faint oil sheen from yesterday. The door closes true without thinking about it. Downstairs, the first oven cycle warms the air, sugar and coffee rising together until the room smells like a place that makes sense. On the sill, the ledger lies half filled with entries that read more like building than defending. Stair tread, dock gate, notarized copy filed, letters mailed, visit set. I close my hands over the paper a second, the way you steady a board before the cut, and let my breath take its cue. Agency at my age doesn't look like victory, it looks like habits I can repeat. The scripts hang by the phone and the downstairs door, simple as safety rules. Please contact our attorney, Mr. Nguyen. No consent to record. Copies go into sleeves the day they're made. Receipts get paper-clipped before they wander. I sit down when the knee says sit. I go outside after lunch because oxygen changes the kind of thoughts you have. It's not heroic, and that is the point. I don't need to feel exceptional. I need to keep the day from tilting. That much I can manage. The hard lines we drew turned out to be a form of care. I used to think boundaries were fences you built for keeping people out. Now I see them as the frame that lets love hold its shape. The no surprise rule, the counsel-only contact, the visits on a calendar instead of a whim, those weren't punishments. They were lanes with painted stripes so the kids could be driven safely between homes. We drew lines so they could color inside them. On Sundays, we take a short video call. When Colin's eyes search my face for something I could hand him, I let the silence sit a beat longer than comfort. We're here, I say. Next visit is the 18th. The sentence does enough. It leaves the rest to the plan. I had a long season when outrage called itself action. The posts I didn't make are a ledger of their own. Paper is slower and heavier and somehow kinder. The evaluator's report, the notarized signatures, the SBA packet with its wrong pressure on my name, those pages changed the weather without asking me to perform my pain. When I slid Dr. Rutherford's signed report into a sleeve and clicked the binder ring shut, I felt the breath return in a measured length I could trust. Proof isn't loud, it holds. The town has been the court, that mattered. No proclamations, no carved plaques, just Marisol's quiet sign by the register and the way she set hot water down the day we needed it. Ray adding me to the storm drill and handing over the supply cage key without speech. Lila's volunteers who kept a watch by the phone and never asked to be thanked. A fisherman's two-finger salute that arrived like a verdict. Reputation here is repaired the way docks are, by showing up with tools, by tightening hardware that had been left to rattle, by keeping an eye on weather that is everyone's problem. Marriage, in the long run, turns out to be a duet you rescore as the instruments change. Nora's flower on the sleeve of her sweater, my palm under the tray's lip as we turn together at the door, a wordless transfer that keeps the roles from sliding. She checks the timing on my pills the way you check the oven light, a glance, a nod. I walk the alley while the first sheet bakes and come back with a better knee and a cheaper heart rate. In the evenings, we read the kids' letters aloud. I try to keep my voice even and fail in tiny ways that nobody needs to fix. If there's a twist left in this story, it's a quiet one. The escape was also a return. Leaving the optimized glass house delivered me back to the unoptimized self I trust, the one with a block plane iron on the sill, a ledger under the hand, a dog whose gait matches mine, a day shaped by the things that set and cure. I didn't reinvent, I retrieved. The parts of me that had been treated as liabilities, stubborn care for detail, a dislike of shortcuts, the need to understand how the hinge moves, turned back into assets when the work asked for them. If I were to pass along a tool list to a future self or anyone who needs it, it would be short. Keep your dignity in daily practice, not speeches. Draw lines early and treat them as care. Keep proof. Paper outlasts noise. Accept help that preserves your agency and give help that preserves someone else's. Keep working at something you can finish before lunch. The near horizon looks like a calendar square. June's newest drawing, Scout in heroic proportion, goals carefully shaped, hangs in a plastic frame by the coffee station, bright as a flag. Arlo's cleat hitch has improved. Ray says he's got the turn right even when nobody is watching. A postcard went out yesterday with a doc sketch and 3 words that belong to us alone. We plan a visit when school pauses. The rules sit at the edge of the plan like guardrails, visible enough to keep us from pretending gravity is negotiable. Afternoon cools the window glass until the neon looks like a small stove on the other side of the square. I open the ledger to a fresh page and write TOMORROW in a blockish hand that always looks younger than I am. The binder rings click once when I set the notarized signature copy back in its place. The sound is unremarkable and beautiful. I lay the block plane iron across the top margin like a straight edge. Not because the line will be long, but because I want the first cut true. Somewhere outside a buoy bell pulls a single note through the air. The door closes the way a door should. I write one clean line, oil door, prep dough, call Dax with SSA confirmation, and let the rest of the evening run on the warmth of sugar and the steady breath of the harbor. When we click the lights off, the gull keeps its shape in the window, and I recognize the quiet for what it is. Not an absence of trouble, but the presence of a life we've chosen and built, one small, proof-backed task at a time. In the end, survival didn't arrive with a trumpet. It arrived as a habit. Dignity turned out to be something practiced in small circles. Sign your own name, keep your own proofs, rest when you must, work when you can. Boundaries, once mistaken for walls, revealed themselves as frames that let love hold its shape. And the loudest weather passed not because anyone shouted it down, but because evidence, patiently gathered, weighed more than outrage ever could. What lasts is ordinary and stubborn, a door that closes true because someone planed it straight, a light that hums because a loose wire found its seat, a notebook that remembers so the heart doesn't have to carry every shard. This is how a life is restored, not by winning arguments, but by keeping faith with the tasks that make tomorrow possible. There's a quiet philosophy here, the kind that fits in a pocket. Choose work that steadies your hands. Keep paper that steadies your story. Accept help that leaves you standing. Draw lines that let care flow without flooding the room. And when fear insists on a verdict, step back, breathe, and let time show its preference for truth. If this journey says anything, it's that agency in late chapters belongs to those who refuse to be edited out of their own signatures. You don't have to be loud to be heard, you have to be clear. You don't have to be perfect to be safe, you have to be prepared. And you don't have to go it alone. Community is a reputation court, and it keeps better hours than the internet. Thank you for being here and walking the last steps with us. If a line or moment stayed with you, tell us why in the comments. We read every one. Share where you're watching from and what you're taking forward. If this resonated, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It helps these stories find the people who might need them. Until the next tale, take gentle care, keep your proofs close, and let your quiet work speak for you.